Keith, it's another episode of Season 5 of Deep Space Nine, which can only mean one thing.
What's that?
Someone's dad must die.
It's so dark.
It's true, though.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Keith and Mike Watch Deep Space Nine. Today we are talking about Season 5, Episode 19, Ties of Blood and Water. We're both a little sleepy from staying up watching the conventions, but we are excited to be here. Mike, how you doing, buddy?
Good, Keith. I did stay up to watch it. In fact, I was watching on my phone because I had transferred to bed, and I found myself, I passed out. Like, it snoozed away in the middle of Mr. Obama, the end of Mr. Obama's speech. So I had to go back and watch it, and also
do not pass out when I'm talking.
I got my hoodie, which means it's a great day because when we enter hoodie weather, things change until it gets cold, and then I'm depressed. But we've got a good window here. We've got a good window.
Got some hoodie weather and the sun. Lots to be optimistic about these days. Heady times. So let's talk about a very sad episode of Deep Space Nine. But before we do that, Mike, we have to talk about last week's episode, Business as Usual. But it's not business as usual for us.
No.
Because
we had an on-air production meeting last week, and we took care of those things.
All of our production meetings are on air.
It's true. It's the only time we talk.
We just talked for like an hour before we started.
We did.
But we have to show off our new toy in a segment we call Hails from the Patrons.
You really set that up to be a little bit more exciting.
we put some text on the footer. But I bothered to download the sound of the
which your family probably owns partially, right?
Oh man, created? Yes. Owns? No.
Yeah, wrong choice of word there.
Yeah. Oh, if only the you could get a penny for every time that sound is played. Nope, doesn't work that way. Otherwise, I don't know.
We probably wouldn't be doing a podcast.
I mean, by the properties of trickle-down economics, even I would be benefiting from that in some fashion. All right, so here is what our patrons had to say about business as usual. See, now I don't have to ask you how you get your things read, because you just be a patron. And the link right there, patreon.com/KNM. Here is what you had to say. Joshua Cronin said, "Oh my God, my boyfriend has been listening for months now in the background while I listen to you guys weekly, and during your songs between the scenes," I think you call them bumpers, we do, "he sings along to them. Trivia, AlamarEmmys, and stem bolts. I'm so sorry, I'm assuming is what the proper response to that. See, I could never get Jillian to watch anything, so I'm delighted you were able to get your boyfriend on board." Joshua continues, "I really enjoyed this episode. I like that we see Quark trying to save his butt financially, then his moral dilemma he has to deal with, and it makes him seem much more deep. Like the actor that plays Gala. I like the actor who plays Gala. I made a figure of him. Also love Haggoth. He's maniacally fun to listen to. 73 self-sealing stem bolts from me." Brian from Video Game Drive-By says, "Everyone in this episode was playing for the cheap seats, and I am here for it. 85 stem bolts for me, because if it's not hugely important episode overall, but man, it's watchable. I had to edit my score from 75 to 85 because I had a thought that makes it much better."
Okay.
You mentioned how we often get episodes that give a hard look at characters like Odo and Kira. I think this episode does make us struggle with a hard fact about Quark. That being, we do feel sympathy for him in his plight. As much as we love to make fun of the Ferengi way of life in this episode, as you said, not once did we as an audience get mad at him and think that's the thing we need to consider. We are okay with Quark doing what he did because I think when push comes to shove, wouldn't we all commit a little war crime just to survive? Just a little? Congratulations on 500 videos. As for my channel, we are currently playing a game involving a ghost that I think Keith is gonna like. He do be thirsty, like my co-host after all. Mike's the thirsty one.
Yeah, definitely me.
Mike is usually the thirsty one. But,
although they were playing a game called Inscription I mentioned last week, Keith. That one you should check out. I think you would really dig Inscription. It's a cool game.
Okay.
Got horror vibes, card deck building, your kind of thing.
Okay. All right. Yeah. All right. Kalana Kamor says, I barely even watch my own video games, but I definitely should pop in because I have tolerated Mike watching Mike play video games online enough.
That's fair.
So, Kalana Kamor says, I love this episode because Stephen Burkhoff in every role I have seen him play is not just going for Shakespeare, it's Greek outdoor theater. Chewing the furniture, big intense, loved it. Poor Siddig El-Fadil was directing, and the real Lawrence Tierney actor is a real criminal and kook. Couldn't remember his lines, threatened with a knife someone on the set, or another show did that. So in rewatching, knowing the behind the scenes and the actors involved makes this even more delish for me. Also, saying Keith's Jimmy Stewart falls into Don Knotts within seconds. That is really funny. I had not even considered that. But as an 80s kid, I know Don Knotts from all the Disney movies. Was it the Herbie movies he was in, or was it?
I only think of Three's Company.
Oh.
Wasn't he Mr. Roper on that?
I never watched Three's Company. That's slightly before my time. Harry Pothead says 80 self-sealing stem bolts. I like this episode a lot. Kevin Miles gives it 88 self-sealing stem bolts. Hibernation Pods says, sometimes it's the little moments that make it for me. The rest is just generic context to fill up the story time, but it does okay. I like the episode, but I can focus on moments like Gala's twinkling little lights speech, Cisco getting in Quark's face, or Dax's cold shoulder, and the episode is all that much better overall for me. It always relates to so much that is our reality. It might not be the main arc, but it runs along with the shady and ominous parallels. 70 self-sealing stem bolts. Yeah, I think you're right, because even if the arms dealing isn't with factors in our little Dominion war, the fact that it's arms dealing in war is always sort of there under the subtext. So yeah, I like it. Mysterious Anne says, you brought up that this episode is a relic of the 24 plus episode seasons of yore. I think that's right on, but I'm increasingly convinced that filler episodes are just as important as dramatic arc building, amazing storytelling ones. Falling back on sitcom tropes probably gave the writers a bit of a break. But as we get into the heavier Dominion War stuff, I think that they're also thinking that the audience needs a brain break too. Is it a little weird that our little light brain break is also about the ethics of arms dealing and genocide? Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. Going with comedy to sell a serious story can be disorienting, and Deep Space Nine does it a lot with Quark. Another example of that comes to mind is Odo and Quark's buddy comedy when they were also dying on a mountain, while Jake and Nog are learning that they are being stuck at being roommates. The dying on the mountain bit, kind of a rough fit at times. I think it was YouTube viewer who noted a few episodes ago that Deep Space Nine likes to use the classic theatrical comedy of remarriage format. The episode might end in a wedding, but it's got parents and kids fighting then reconciling, or a romance tested and then renewed, or just in this case, Quark and Jadzia's friendship tested then restored. Same goes for Quark's status on the station and his reputation with Starfleet. The neat wrap-up is definitely by design, and it does feel a little out of sync with arms dealing, a murder room, 2 lunatics who are probably going to kill Quark still at large, and that chilling Gala monologue about blinking out entire planets. I'm listening to the Delta Flyers podcast, and I'm curious to hear what Armin Shimmerman's take is on this episode and other episodes where Quark faces serious ethical issues in the context of a comedic story format. And I'm curious what you guys think. Does that writing choice undercut the Quark character? It was, yeah. I think the choice to sort of tell it in a light way, this darkness, or the serious ethical quandaries that Quark deals with.
I don't know that it undercuts. I mean, we've said often that Quark is kind of written up and down a bit. There's an unevenness to his
level of evil.
yeah, and just sort of the weight of things on him. We don't always get to see how much that weighs on him. The ethics of his different situations weigh on him. In fact, he hides behind the sort of black and white nature of Ferengi culture to not have to deal with some of that sometimes. So I guess my short answer would be no. I don't think it undercut the character for me.
Yeah, and I think using comedy as our... I wouldn't call it like a comedy episode, but I think the Ferengis being comedic tonally in general is a good way to sort of trick us into these dilemmas, to trick us into these situations where we might not necessarily click on that video or go down that road because it was like, oh boy, that's dark, and yet you're sort of acclimating us in with a little lightness, and then we realize halfway through, oh wow, we're on this journey. And I think that there's some value in doing it that way, so that it's not so relentlessly bleak, but also sort of forces us into that place. I mean, I think of, boy, this is really pulled from out of nowhere, but Hannah Gadsby's comedy is like that. On her Nanette special, where I think they are doing really funny, great stand-up comedy, and then there's this turn, and then like, oh my God, you've just like torn out my heart with this insightful, emotional, dark turn that I don't know if I would have clicked on it if it had been that way the whole time. And that there's something really smart about how you can use lightness and darkness together to create a much more devastating impact in the end. And continues, I really like the ideas you shared about zooming out and zooming in. This reminds me of how I felt the first time I saw Rogue One, and I realized it was the same kind of genocidal horror we see in A New Hope, but zoomed in as opposed to zoomed out. Why does seeing the destruction of the Jedha city and not seeing the destruction of Alderaan make a difference? It shouldn't, but it does. Even within the existing episode, I think that they could have given Quark a moment of that kind of realization. Where he's listening to Gala talking about lights blinking out and looks over and sees Miles wearily but lovingly holding Yoshi and makes a quick connection. Good idea. Quick peek into my thoughts while listening to you guys. Whoa, Mike just brought up a holodeck ethics issue I haven't thought about. We never hear people exploring the ethics of holo parents or friends. We always just get to see stuck on the seat. There it is. Equilibrium destroyed. That's funny.
It's true, because clearly we have holo doctors, right? So why couldn't we have a holo babysitter?
80 self-sealing stem bolts. Yeah, I mean, and as we are quickly headed to, like, you know, AI friendships, AI relationships. What are the ethics there? What's healthy? What's not? I don't know. And I imagine as you get further down the road, and Voyager spends a lot of time on this, honestly, and I think that is one of the most interesting parts of Voyager. Anyway, to be continued. YouTube viewer says, I didn't know that Siddig directed anything. This is pretty good camera work. I'm impressed. In my headcanon, the FCA cannot confiscate Quark's bar because the Federation and Bajor don't have an extradition or legal reciprocity treaty with the Ferengi Alliance. That's fair. Also, correction, Gala was not the one who sent the Hunter tracker drone when Quark was Nagus for a week. Gala was the one who gave Quark the sabotaged ship in Little Green Men. I like the fact that Hagith made Quark pay off his debts. He may be a mustache-twirling villain, but he is a grown-up villain capable of long-term planning. Yeah. Likewise, backing the Bajorans showed he was a thinking man's villain, unlike the Bumblers from the Orion Syndicate last episode. I tend to agree with Mike's insights, but I think comparing Thanos to Hagith makes little sense. It'd be like me saying Mike and Keith are very similar because they are both male humans with a background in drama. Yes, I agree that I think the analogy is wrong. However, I think Mike and Keith having similarities because they're both male people with backgrounds in drama, we do have some similarities because of that. I think pointing out that we have, that there are things similar with us. It's not black or white. We're not exactly the same or have no similarities. As we unravel the onion, connections actually make a difference, even if they're not binary.
Yeah, and actually, it's a great correction, because the more I thought about it, Thanos, I think, is much more sympathetic than as the villain from last week was presented, for sure. So I'll be corrected when I'm wrong.
Yeah, all right. Well, I'm not even going to say you're 0 for 2 on another thing in a wormhole. I don't remember what it was. But YouTube continues. In my headcanon, snail juice is to snails what orange juice is to oranges. You use a lot of the nutritional value when it's juiced. I bet that's probably true.
That's true, man. Everybody's into juicing, but your smoothies are better because you get the fiber, baby.
Yeah. You gotta blend those snails. Mm-hmm. Don't just squish them.
Which reminds me of a funny meme word we came up with last week, and now I can't remember it. It had to do with the snail something.
Wow. Great stuff. Jadzia has worth it. Jadzia has a very thick skin against casual Ferengi sexism and greed. But when a big moral issue comes up, she is uncompromising. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. And
I would love a more Daxi episode soon. I'm feeling the need for some Jadzies. You know what I mean?
Yeah. They continue. Lastly, I don't think that only sociopaths are offended by betrayal. In Dante's Inferno, the very bottom circle of hell is for betrayers. I believe non-sociopaths are very offended by betrayal, too. Yeah, totally agreed. I don't think my point was... I think frequently you think the thing I'm saying only that. When I point out that sociopaths are very offended by betrayal, that is a common trait. I'm not saying that other people aren't.
I think Keith is feeling betrayed right now. And
I feel a little betrayed.
We might be learning something.
No, but in like, go to the DSM, right? One of the traits of being a sociopath is that you are particularly aggrieved by it. Everybody is. But it is a particular type of narcissistic injury when somebody betrays you. Mm-hmm. All right. And we get 80 self-sealing stem bolts from YouTube viewer. I think it is time to move on and talk about this episode. So professional. We've got everything going right now.
It seems like everybody liked the episode much better than we did.
Yeah.
Or at least as we ranked it.
Yeah, no, that's true. We've been a little bit different from the because we really liked I forgot which episode it was, a couple episodes ago, which is generally reviled. A Simple Investigation, which I think both of us were like, it's not nearly as bad as its reputation.
Here's what I don't want to spoil, but what I'm learning, Keith, is that I think a lot of fans and a lot of rankings people are generally ranking things standalone based on the episode in the grand scheme of the series, right? Whereas we are in a situation, myself specifically, but you too, we are watching these sequentially, and I think the vibes of an episode are affected by the preceding season, the preceding oeuvre of episodes, and so episodes that might be heralded overall in context of the others, like maybe we've had too many Quark episodes in a row, or blah, whatever the case may be. So it's interesting. There are definitely other factors at play.
And I think, like, as we talk about zooming in and zooming out, right, that there's a couple different things happening. A, you're seeing all this for the first time, so you don't have a concept of the larger arc. And by definition, the way we're doing this, we're slowing down. We're watching one a week.
Right.
As opposed to like a normal rewatch. You turn it on, you're watching 5 episodes a day, and you're burning through the entire 7 seasons in a couple of months. I mean, and we're literally going week by week, and so it is sort of slowing things down and allowing us to process
and that time
differently.
That time is important, and it does highlight some of the challenges the writers have, because to be frank with you, until I got some of the exposition this week, I forgot about the whole Kira, their history. Even though it was a great episode.
Yeah.
But I'd kind of forgotten about it. And so, sometimes an episode might feel redundant because it has to spit up all this, rehash all of this plot, but dum-dums like me need it.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, Ties of Blood and Water aired on April 14th, 1997. The top song continued to be Turn It Off. Can't Nobody Hold Me Down, Puff Daddy featuring Maze. The top movie. Dude. That's exactly how it went.
That's our stand-in, yeah.
Yeah. Top movie, an iconic, fantastic, underrated movie. You know what it was, Mike?
I don't.
Anaconda.
And to be frank, it doesn't want none unless you got buns, hun. So there you go.
Not that Anaconda.
Yeah.
No, this was the J-Lo movie. So much fun. I
feel bad for her.
I don't know what's going on there, but
I'm just saying, there's a chance.
Oh, I love a complicated and difficult, talented woman, but I think
J-Lo? What would we call if Keith and J-Lo got together? Varney Low? J-Varn? J-Varn's not bad.
Jeeth?
I can't explain to you why Jeeth cracks me up so much.
I don't like my chances. I don't think she sees poor.
Oh, even at the prospect, I can see your head just spontaneously exploding.
I don't think I'm allowed to make eye contact with her based on my socioeconomic status. All right.
Okay.
So, anyway, I saw Anaconda in a double bill with Jurassic Park 2 in a drive-in.
Is that the Lost Kingdom, Jurassic Park 2?
Lost World.
Lost World.
With my dad and my little brother, we went and saw it in a drive-in. So much
I definitely saw it. A lot of water in that one, right?
In the Anaconda? Yeah, they're on a boat going through the Amazon. So good. Like, it's one of those ones that's like so bad it's good, but it knew it was bad and leaned into it
Snakes
and had a really fun time. Yeah, kind of. Yeah. All right. So, speaking of snakes on a plane, what was on TV tonight?
I didn't pull it up.
Great, because last week I forgot, and you're like you pulled us all the way back. So on my screen in front of me, I made it huge in red, Mike's TV rating, so I was guaranteed not to forget the important segment.
But you know what? I guess feel like since we're here, Keith.
Yeah.
Now that we're talking about it.
Because I failed to give you time.
You did, but I forget where I put the link. And then when I click on the link, I don't have the date. But remind me the date.
April 14th, 1997.
Of course it was. Of course it was April 14th. And of course everyone knows that ABC was leading with a show called Relativity. Hearts and Bones. Followed by the ABC Monday Night Movie, which was Bites. Of course. Now, yeah. Keith, CBS finally started a show. And when did this start? Because I haven't seen it listed before. It started the year before, but okay, there you go, September 96. So we're probably in our second season now. Everybody Loves Raymond, which I didn't watch on the first run, but have watched it, I think 2 full run-throughs.
It's your mom's favorite show.
My mom's favorite show, and god damn, it's funny. God, I love that show. And they were just hitting their stride here in season 2. What else do we have? Melrose Place, Pacific Palisades, which they tried to follow Melrose Place with. I don't remember that one. And then, Keith, a show that I don't remember, but it sounds like I should, Boston Common. It's on NBC.
I don't know that, but I do know, speaking of Boston, the season 1 finale of The Practice aired this week. Part 6. Because there was only 6 episodes in the first season of The Practice, even though they filmed like another 8.
Yeah, and filmed it in Boston, right? It was totally actually filmed and totally on location in Boston.
Steam!
And then, of course, WB just doing what WB does, which was crush it at the time. Seventh Heaven, followed by Buffy the Vampire Slayer, because thematically, that works.
Yeah, sure. Boston Common did 32 episodes. How about that? All right. So enough of that. What was Voyager doing? They were off this week.
This feels like they take a lot of vacay.
Well, I think they try to stagger the treks a little bit, so we have at least one new episode every week throughout the season, which I think makes sense. But Ties of Blood and Water was new, because this episode we're talking about, it was directed by none other than Avery Brooks, who last directed on Body Parts. So it's always fun to see what the cast was wearing in their street clothes when directing, because it's the late 90s. Fashion wasn't so great unless you're Avery Brooks and then you look cool as hell.
Oh yeah,
no matter what, always. I mean, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen any cast member wear on set. So there you go. This episode has a teleplay by Robert Hewitt Wolfe with a story by Edmund Newton and Robert L. Slocum. Slocum was a PA on the show at the time and was able to pitch this story. How cool is that?
It's so cool.
Star Trek is so democratic in that way. Just didn't work. Zach Galifianakis and Margot Kidder was on Boston Common. What an interesting group of people. All right. So, it's time for, Mike. Now, Keith, waste your time with trivial trivia. Why is it so loud?
Somehow the fader swapped between you and the bumpers. So, I don't know. That's the answer to your question.
That was horrible. That was horrible. All right, so trivial trivia for this episode. Thomas Kupache, who plays Kira's father, is one of only a few actors to appear in all 4 of the Star Trek spin-off series in the 90s, and is only one of 5 actors to play 7 or more different characters in Star Trek.
We used to have a fun bumper on Out of Practice for that.
We should. Oh, yeah, we should have that somewhere.
We should recycle that, yeah.
Yeah. The others being Jeffrey Combs, back in this very episode, Randy Oglesby, J.G. Hertzler, and Vaughn Armstrong. Very cool. So Kupache's episodes were Mirok in the Next Generation episode The Next Phase, the train engineer in Emergence, Enterprise B communications officer in Star Trek Generations, Viorsa in Voyager The Thaw, Kira Taban in Deep Space Nine this episode, and Wrongs Darker Than Death or Night, and Tos in Enterprise Broken Bow, and a sphere builder test subject in Enterprise Harbinger. So Harbinger of things to come. We're going to see more of Mr. Thomas Kupache here on Star Trek. So this episode introduces the new character of Weyoun 5 after his death into the Death, and reveals that the Vorta clone themselves. So, new and interesting thing, a premise which was created specifically so Jeffrey Combs could reprise his role. Thank God.
And he seemed to have a wink and nod about, apparently they don't just clone them physically. It seems like they also have either been uploaded or somehow have retained some sort of a experiential memory. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, we might get more into that. Yeah, super, super cool. And like, any excuse you can find to get Jeffrey Combs on the screen is a good one. And we're just scratching the surface. I'm so excited. Ira Stephen Bear, the showrunner, explained, when we first saw Jeffrey Combs do the role Into the Death, we were wishing we could find a different ending to the episode because we really didn't want the character to die. But we couldn't think of anything. And the next thing you know, we're out in Griffith Park shooting the fight and he's dead. And I knew immediately he had to come back. There was no way he couldn't. Awesome. Lawrence Pressman, who plays the Cardassian surrogate father, was impressed by Avery Brooks' direction of this episode. He commented, "Avery's a man who keeps to himself, not somebody who chats easily, but as a director, he was right there and extraordinarily helpful. Somebody said to me, Avery talks like jazz. It's true, he does. What's more, it's brilliant jazz, wonderful stuff. He gives you images. He does it through eye contact with you, so you get the feeling of what he wants. He gave me a lot of courage. It would be so easy to go the wrong way with the character. He pushed me constantly in other directions, then pushed me even further in that direction. You can't ask for anything more than that. Yeah, I mean, if you've ever heard an interview with Avery Brooks, it's 100% that. His mind is just like
I read
zipping
that
around.
TV Guide interview, which I thought actually was pretty great for a TV Guide.
I mean, he's so smart, but so also like uncompromising and open and like just sparks of ideas constantly. It's really cool. You want to know who also sparks ideas, who uses their mind like jazz?
Keith,
it's our
Hall of
patrons.
Famers. Yes, the Hall of Famers should lead. These are the people who have just gone above and beyond. But if you want to get to that tier, Keith, you got to climb the ladder. And to climb the ladder, you got to start at the first rung. And the first rung starts here, baby. The patrons!
Right here.
We thank them. In some cases, we don't deserve them. In most cases, to be honest.
All cases. Look, which one of those do we deserve?
That's true. So let me go ahead and just say their names out loud for the world to hear. They produce the show. They just love us almost as much as we love them. Bryant, Keepable Beersock.
We don't know that.
Peter Bank, Frank Grinch, Mark Spar, Yanba, Ryan Chesley, Joshua Cronin, Merritt Neath, Andrew Hayes, Alan, and the mysterious Worf's Big Old Boot Shivs, Charles Babbage, Harry Pothead, Anton Thies, Carl Fisher, CRM Productions, Nikolai Ivanovich Lobachevsky, Delusions, When at Noon, YouTube viewer, James, Hubble Telescope, Hibernation Pod, Miri, Holcomb, Brian from the Video Game Drive-By Podcast, Odo's Bucket, upping their ranks this week, the Lost Emu.
Yes.
But you know what? I once was lost, and now you are found, Emu. Here you are. Nemu, Emu, and Doug, JD Miggs, Colin Dagan, Chris Mitchell, CRM, Frank, Pat, Josh, Kim Goss, J.D. Lutz, Kremer, White, Eldridge, and Andreas Erickson, The Few, The Proud, The Podcasters, Quarksbar, and Chancellor Jen also subscribing. That's my wallet, and I'm still giving that every month. You can join the team, patreon.com/K&M.
Yeah, boy, I never regret the patrons. I sometimes regret giving Mike as much autonomy to just do nonsense.
What are you talking about? Nailed it. Freaking nailed it.
All right, our guest stars this week, of course, are Lawrence Pressman as Gamar, Mark Alaimo as Gul Dukat, Thomas Kopacci as Kira Taban, William Luckling as Pharrell, and Jeffrey Combs back as Weyoun 5. Not 4 anymore, 5. And interestingly, I feel like each of the clones, while they share a lot of the memories and information, they're all just a tiny bit different, which I think is really fun. You know, I think would be fun right now, Mike. Okay, ties of blood and water. And in our teaser, we find a very excited Kira. Her Cardassian surrogate father, Gamar, is coming to visit.
Papa, can you hear me?
He's been leading the dissident movement, and now that Dominion has taken over, he's in position to be a big political figure. She tells Dax and Worf to make a big fuss. And we, helpfully for Mike, recap Second Skin.
Keith, I'm so glad that you were talking there, but you know what? The only thing I could think in my head.
What's that?
Literally, and this is where you could tell that I am just a straight space cadet, people. Folks, friends, family. I got caught up in my brain because I kept thinking last night, you see, the dog wouldn't go number 2. She was feeling away. She wouldn't go number 2. We've all been there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And that's all I could think about ever since you said the word dissident movement. Because at the end of the day, what is constipation but a dissident movement?
You were not indifferent to the movement of the dog. Yes, luckily, Pretzel, who I'm taking care of for a couple of days, is pretty good about. She's got a thing. It's amazing for such a tiny little dog. Impressively large movements. I gotta say, hands off. All right, you're welcome, people. You're welcome, internet. You were here for Star Trek. Guess what you got? Discussion about dog poop. Yeah. So we excuse me, recap Second Skin.
So Odo doesn't have to poop anymore. He's done pooping.
No more pooping.
Back to gooping.
All goop, no poop.
All right, we'll see you next week.
Odo for president. All poop, no goop. Wait, the other way around. Yeah, okay. There it is. Wow, we are in the teaser and we're off the rails. So, now how well do you remember the episode Second Skin?
I remember Kira's face as a Cardassian. I remember a discussion of the Obsidian Order time. I remember another fun guest star who was the Obsidian Order guy who we just died, right?
Tane. Is Tane in that episode? I don't remember.
I might be confusing them, but maybe.
Yeah, but he's the head of the Obsidian Order, so it makes sense.
Yeah, I remember liking it. I remember we enjoyed it. We got to kind of go on location. It was a cool episode. I mean, Nana was featured, and she was great, so there you go.
Yeah. But, of course, the purpose of it was to set up this guy as he was working undercover in the dissident movement, and they caught him in this, which then pushed him out of Cardassia, making him an exile, and setting up him in, as Kira's thinking, to be pretty important in this new world with the Dominion having taken over Cardassia.
But this could be the first. Here's what I didn't get, and you can explain to me. It's not necessarily a wormhole, but let's clear it. You know what? We got to clear the wormhole. But first, Keith, you ready for it?
Yeah, he's so proud of this.
Get used to it, folks.
I'm surprised he didn't call me to tell me he'd done that.
So, how long was she a Cardassian? Like, how long was that whole plot? Because
just a couple of days.
Right. So why does she feel like this guy's her father now? Because they did that doesn't it take a little bit longer for the ties that bind you as like, this is my stepdad?
Well, I think two things. One, she was missing a father figure, and we find out more about it now. He was missing a daughter, and in that moment, there's a moment in Second Skin where Kira really starts to doubt. Even if it's just a split second, am I actually this person? Because they tried to convince her that she was a Cardassian spy and her memory had been wiped, and they kept trying to prove to her that she was this person. And there's a split second where she starts to wonder if she actually is this person. And in that moment, even if it's a split second, he actually was her father. And I think the sort of trauma bonding of that situation and his kindness, he revealed himself to be this incredibly kind father figure for somebody in search of that. I bought it.
When my dad was sick, I was doing a play, and I don't remember much about it. I've talked about a few people, but this lady Linda was playing my mom in the play. She was so caring and so nurturing to me during that transitional period with my dad. I did not keep in touch with her. I was not friends with her afterwards, but in the last play I just did, and so you're talking 22 years later, she came to see the play. She lived in the neighborhood. She came to see the play, and just seeing her was like my instant love for this woman flooded back because of what she had done for me. So you know what, Keith? I'm removing the wormhole.
Take that wormhole off of there. Now, all right, here's the thing. If you're going to do the wormhole when it enters, when you take it away, you have to do the opposite of wormhole.
Whole worm.
Mm-hmm. That's not even a wormhole backwards, but we'll take it.
Please move forward.
We knew this episode was going to make Mike cry, but I wasn't expecting it. Woo! Yeah. It would be low morale.
Oh, I'll have to edit that out.
Low morale. No, you got to leave that in, buddy.
Ooh.
You absolutely cannot edit that out.
Oh, I am crying. Okay, let's go.
Oh, wow. We're still in the teaser.
Where'd to go? Yeah, we're moving though.
All right, so he arrives. We're in the third paragraph. He arrives in a fancy cashmere sweater, and
so
Kira greets him warmly, as he must be. Have you ever had a cashmere sweater?
Oh, yeah, terrible.
I had a girlfriend buy me a cashmere sweater. So comfortable, but also so hot. He mentions that he's a little bit tired. Chekhov's a little bit tired. Kira shows him his quarters, and he's excited and is excited about him taking a leadership position, setting up a dissident government on the station and fighting the Dominion, sending messages in. It's a really good idea, and he even says so. But unfortunately, as we mentioned, he's a little tired, and of course, he's dying. So in Act 1, Bashir confirms, guess what? He is dying.
Yeah, he's dying.
But Kira refuses to lose hope. Then Sisko gets a call from our old buddy Dukat. And Sisko closes, we're going to need it. We're going to need a whole worm at the end of this.
Okay.
Sisko says, still calling yourself Gull, Dukat? I'm surprised you haven't promoted yourself to Legate by now. And Dukat says, I prefer the title Gull. Much more hands-on than Legate, and much less pretentious than any of the other alternatives. President, Emperor, First Minister, Emissary. How about Dominion Puppet? Yeah, so Dukat, what does he do?
Hey,
There it is. We have solved it from a couple episodes before. Dukat gets to the point. They want Gamar. Sisko, unsurprisingly, tells him to pound sand. Back in Kira's quarters, Kira proudly shows off her sort of baby. He's then sort of his grandfather, which is kind of sweet. And he asks Kira if she's ever going to have a child of her own. And he knows about Shakar. He knows, what's going on there. And he says, like it or not, you're a public figure. The first officer of one of the most important military installations in the quadrant. Your feud with Kai Wind is already becoming a legend. Did you know you have your own section in the Cardassian Central Archives? Which is an interesting reminder, and a lot of shows like this, we kind of forget that in the world, all of our characters are kind of famous.
Yeah.
And, Worf is famous with the Klingons. Kira's famous with the Bajorans. Obviously, Sisko being the emissary, and so Odo is famous for being the only changeling. I mean, poor O'Brien, not famous. Bashir, a famous doctor. Quark, a famous Ferengi, been kicked out. So it is interesting that they don't get recognized as much as they probably would be in real life. So Kira then tells Gamar that Dukat wants to extradite him. And he says, Nerys, I know more about the Cardassian government than anyone alive. Names, alliances, plots, things that could do a lot of good in the right hands. There's a Cardassian tradition called Shrital. The dying give their secrets to their family to use against their enemies. But I have no one left to carry my secrets, no one but you. Great sort of storytelling detail that the Cardassians have, that their deathbed ritual, I think a lot of people on their deathbed will spill secrets or say things they've never meant to say, but the fact that the Cardassians, inherent to the ritual, is using it against their enemies, fascinating.
Feels very oligarchy, yeah?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's, I think the Cardassians were originally meant to be sort of a stand-in for Germany from World War II, but in a lot of ways
they're like Cold War Russia,
or Cold War, and in a lot of ways they're much more like contemporary Russia.
Yeah,
with Putin and the oligarchs and the like, it's. I mean, I guess that really speaks to how our human history goes in circles, and so they're much like Russia currently, including the dissident movement and including the people suffering because of the oligarchs in charge causing them to get in all these, it's like fascinating. So Kira goes to Sisko to discuss this plan. And of course, Sisko is very interested in the intelligence. And Kira is strangely not so sure that she should be the one to take the info. And her hesitation here is odd. And we don't really know why until the very end. But she begins having flashbacks to when she was in the Resistance. We see her in a cave surrounded with wounded, and Farrell, back from the dead, and back before he lost an arm, great little storytelling there, calls out for Kira. Her father arrives on a stretcher, severely wounded. And we continue the story later, but back in the present, Kira knows she has no choice but to do the ritual. So in Act 2, Bashir shows Kira how to administer the pain medication at Gamar's bedside. And he says, being with someone with a terminal condition isn't easy. And in a case like this one, where you'll be acting as Gamar's only source of emotional support. And Kira says, I know what I'm getting myself into, and I think this is where, like, gets into some real stuff, right? Caring for somebody, on their deathbed. And I do not have that experience. I know that you do. And I think of my mother, who, in the height of the pandemic, when everything was so locked down and isolated, cared for her father in the nursing home for the last 3 months of his life, when basically he could have no real contact with anybody. It was a nice place and had his little apartment there, but there could be no visitors. There could be he could barely interact with the staff there. And so when she chose to care for him, lived with him in his little one studio apartment in the nursing home, and she couldn't leave for 3 months until he died. So she had to, she could only communicate with my father on, over phone or Skype or whatever. And so she went through this experience, and there's something genuinely heroic about being there in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to say, but I'll pivot and also say that there are so many, at end of life, there are so many minutia, right, that you think as a human being you'd be somewhat prepared for, but you're not, right? I don't know how you wash a grown person, or how you. A great example here to tie it to the show is, so my dad, the last few days of his life was not really. He was basically in a coma, right? And they had initially showed him, they gave him a little button, like if you need morphine or there's pain or whatever, you can administer it yourself. But then what happens when he's not able to do that? It then falls to the family members or whatnot to decide arbitrarily what is the appropriate thing. Yeah, we could dope him up so we don't have to do it. You don't know how to do that. So, though they garner a lot of press for the bad ones, people who work hospice and work at nursing homes and work at end-of-life facilities or at home, whatnot, the good ones are incredible people doing incredible work, not just for the patient, but for the family. And so, a shout out to them because, and Bashir, I guess, is playing that role here.
Yeah.
So that's what it made me think of. Quick pivot. Seemed callous making this pivot, but I'm going to do it. The set for this end of life sequence, like the hospital, all the doodads, the practicality, the physical stuff, the push and whatnot, and is awesome, right? It's enough tie back to how we do things as humans, but also enough sci-fi-y, down to like the sparkle unicorn blanket. It's just chef's kiss.
Yeah. No, the space blankets always important on Star Trek. You get space blankets, but you'll notice he's still in his fancy sweater. Apparently, Cardassians do not do jammies.
Yeah.
But you'd think that would
you don't
not
need a
be
blanket then, I guess, if you're wearing a
comfortable
giant wool
deathbed
coat,
sweater. Yeah. Enormous. So he asks for water, and you can tell that Kira is nervous. She's desperate to do this well, but as you said, not really equipped to deal with this. But he begins the ritual, telling her who Dukat's enemies are. But he has a plan. But he has pain, and she gives him more meds. He continues his story, and she fades back into another flashback. And we see Kira's father is in really rough shape. He says, "I was such a fool. When the Cardassians started setting fire to the village, I tried to talk to them, tried to reason with them, and look at what they've done to me." Kira says, "I'll make them pay for this, I promise." He says, "They burned my garden, set everything on fire. I worked for years, planting it, caring for it, and now it's gone. We'll plant you a new one, you and I, together. I wish I had your strength, Nerys, your confidence. I'm so afraid." And I think we learn here that her father was not part of the resistance. Her father was a civilian, and the Cardassians burned down his actual garden. He was just living his life. And so, I think Kira had been in the resistance for a while at this point, but it's interesting that we're here in her hometown where this happened. And of course the garden is going to come back and play an important role as we move forward, but I don't think I clocked it the first time I saw the episode. Connecting the connective tissue with the garden. But we'll get there. So, Kira wants to find a medic, but her father begs her not to leave. He doesn't want to be alone. Back in the present, Gamor passes out, and Kira is having a hard time holding it together. Later, Sisko and Kira go over the data. She looks tired, and her voice is rough in this scene. I think on the watch-along, you mentioned it might have been a mic issue. I actually think it was either an illness that Nana was having, or probably more an acting choice of, I've been awake for 30 hours.
Yeah, because they do a makeup thing later where they kind of really blacken her eyes. So that could be could be true.
Because and it says in the script, it's constantly reinforcing like how rough this is on Kira, emotionally as she's going through this. And again, at this point in the episode, we don't really know why yet, but we're gonna get there. And I think it's much more interesting the closer you look at it. So we also see Sisko's clock. It's a clock, prominently in the background. Bashir calls Kira back to Gamar's bedside. He's running out of time. Meanwhile, a giant Jem'Hadar battleship arrives at the station with weapons locked. And so this is the first time we actually say what this is. We saw this in the beginning of the season, but previous to that, we've never addressed. We've seen the Jem'Hadar smaller ships, but this is the Big Daddy. Pretty scary looking, despite the purple lighting. So Dukat arrives in Sisko's office with his Dominion advisor, in hard quotes, Weyoun. And Sisko says to Weyoun, "We've met. I saw you die. It wasn't me, at least not exactly."
Keith, I think we should cut in right now to the episode with a brief look at how Mike tried to remember Weyoun's name last night at the watch along.
Oh my God.
Yes, course.
Let's go.
Wuhan?
Thank you for the kind invitation.
Woo.
This is one of my
As you can see, it wasn't great. And if you want more of that hot content, you can always be a patron, join the watch-alongs.
Yes. I mean, if you think watching Mike cracking himself up on this show is fun, try doing it. It's just Mike all by himself.
Yeah, you're right.
So Dukat explains that the Vorta are experts at cloning. And Weyoun says it tends to mitigate the risk involved with so much of our work. My predecessor was the 4th incarnation of our noble progenitor. I am the 5th. Sisko's immortality. And Weyoun says, of a sort. Interested?
That was cool.
Always looking for an angle. Really cool. But they've got a new tactic to try to stop Gamor. Now, as opposed to trying to extradite him, they've pardoned him fully and want him to return to Cardassia for treatment. Gamor, of course, says not a chance. And Weyoun, always helpful, says to Dukat, they don't seem to like you very much. We're going to have to do something about your public image. Then Dukat tries another tactic. He says, hey, your daughter's still alive, and I can bring you to her. But Gamor refuses to deal with the Dominion, and of course doubts that Dukat is telling the truth. Because why would you think that that would be the truth? More time passes as Gamor continues to tell his secrets to Kira. And we see her literally falling asleep as she's recording, and they are both breaking down further. Later, an exhausted Kira is met in her quarters by Dukat. And their relationship has yet another layer. And he says, your defense of Gamor is admirable. But did it ever occur to you might be fighting the wrong battle? Do you recall the massacre on the Chiesa monastery? And we find out that Gamor has some skeletons in his closet. Kira tells Dukat off, even throwing a glass at him, but this is a tactic that actually works. After he leaves, she can't help but to investigate. And it's interesting to see Dukat's strategy here. I mean, the objective, get rid of Gamor, right? But he has like plan A, B, C, D, E, F, and G on how to do it, continuing to escalate in layers of desperation here. But this is by far his smartest one. And that's driving a wedge between Kira and Gamor, which he would know how to do because he knows Kira so well. Mm-hmm. I think it's really
if you can't
smart.
get the guy, right, shut off the communication valve that he has.
Yeah, drive a wedge. We know something about driving wedges between people these days. Mm-hmm. So in Act 4, I think there's some interesting stage... Go ahead.
It doesn't bother me. Because it's totally earned, and it totally makes sense, but there's a certain naivete in Kira's rage sometimes, right? Mm-hmm. That, I don't know why I want her to be smarter sometimes. Like, of course, he was part of the Obsidian Order. Of course he was part of some shit during the occupation that's gonna upset you, right? Now, it doesn't rise to the level of a wormhole, and it doesn't, it's par for her course, right? She is a bit of a hothead, and those types of things, and it's been consistent, right? Because she is, I'm fixing it for myself, but I thought it'd be interesting to track my thought process.
Well, I mean, the psychology of what Kira is going through is the episode.
Yes, you're right. You know, we deal with so many people, Dukat, the Obsidian Order folk, Garak, to a degree, Quark, duplicity and Weyoun, duplicity and sliding scale ethics and doing what must be done,
moral gray areas,
to achieve the means to your end is what they do, is what they profit in, what they exchange in. Kira, not so much. She is nothing if not, she wears her heart on her sleeve, and she does things pretty much black and white, right?
Yeah.
She fancies herself a freedom fighter, and that's how she rolls. So it does make sense that she can't put herself in his shoes during the occupation and find that empathy, because to her it's just, and of course the flashbacks in this episode highlight her, I don't want to call it a bloodthirst, but her vengeance motivation, let's say, it takes over her. It is the part and parcel for her.
And I think it's really fascinating in this episode, Kira's reasons for reacting this way. And, one is explicitly talked about in the episode, right? Like, she chose to overreact to this, because she's all the things that you said, but also because she can't handle watching him die.
Mm-hmm.
So her reaction to this is an excuse to not watch him die. Which, because she couldn't handle watching her father die. So all these parallels, that's very obvious. And so we'll get into that as we get there. But there's also a part of her, and I think you said perfectly, like her sort of black and white thinking and her like emotional reactiveness and sort of lack of ability to regulate really makes me think about, we talk about trauma all the time, right? And how when trauma is inflicted on you, frequently part of you stops aging at the age that the trauma happened.
Mm-hmm.
And we think for Kira, she was 12, 13 when she joined the resistance. And so she sometimes has emotional reactions and regulation of 13-year-old. And I think that it's that storytelling there is clear and interesting. And so she is both a wise, mature woman and a scared 13-year-old at the same time, as we all are in our own ways. I mean, all of us have trauma, and all of us have parts of themselves that when that's triggered, we are the age that we were when the trauma happened. And I think it's super fascinating. So, but lots more to say about that. So some interesting stage directions here at the beginning of Act 4 that I think is helpful to read. And it says, Gamor is asleep. Kira is quietly going through the motions of caring for Gamor, but something's changed. The perennial look of concern that's been on her face since this whole ordeal started has been replaced by a stony mask. Right now, she's mechanically replenishing Gamor's medication, and sharp eyes may notice she's no longer wearing the bracelet that Gamor gave her. And that's just there in the stage directions. And it's really interesting. So she's caring for him, but she's angry and no longer gentle. And she finally confronts him about his part in the massacre. And he admits that he was part of it. He says they were hiding weapons for the resistance, weapons that were being used to kill my friends. It was war. It was easy to despise you, but you weren't the monsters, we were. I wish I had never joined the military, never volunteered for duty on Bajor, but I did, and I can't change that no matter how much I might want to. Kira says, so instead you hid the truth from me. I didn't want you to hate me. And Kira says, it's what you deserve.
Damn.
And again, I think she's reacting because of all these other subconscious things pulling levers in her head that she's not aware of. Perhaps as much in this moment.
Brings you back to, doesn't it, a little bit, when she, we had that kind of ending with Odo in that one episode where we found out some things in Odo's closet, and she was so quick. This relationship they've built, this love, this friendship, this brotherhood.
Yeah.
And she was willing to almost blow it all up because she didn't like the way he did something.
Yeah. Well, and, I guess I'll say from my own experience, when I was dealing with all of my unprocessed trauma, and I wasn't dealing with my unprocessed trauma, and it was running the show, I had very black and white thinking, and it made me incredibly judgy and incredibly blind to my own hypocrisy. And I think that's what Kira's going through here.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. It's I know this is not like an episode that is particularly well loved, but I think the psychology of Kira is very interesting. So meanwhile, Weyoun is having a blast playing Dabo. The script just says he's playing, but Jeffrey Combs is losing his mind playing Dabo here. It's a very interesting take and a throwback. If you remember at the beginning of the season, Quark was wondering what was going to happen when the Dominion takes over the station because nobody gambles. And ZL says, well, maybe the Vorta are gambling addicts. And you know what? She might have had a point. So then Cisco enters with a bottle of Kanar. And he says, I thought we should talk. I realize I haven't been much of a host. Here, have some Kanar. Dukat refuses. But of course Cisco insists because they both know it's poisoned. Dukat's next tactic is to silence Gamar. That was a very impossible sentence for me to say. Is to attempt to poison him. And of course, Weyoun smiles. He's eating this up. It says so in the stage directions, watching them spar. And it says, how delightful. The mysterious plots, the subtle innuendos, the veiled threats, it's all so entertaining. Then Weyoun drinks the glass because the Vorta are immune to poison.
I kept thinking of Wallace Shawn in Princess Bride in this scene.
Yeah.
You think I'm drinking the poison, but really, I'm thinking that you think that I will think that you will think that I'm drinking the poison. Just...
Yeah. Well, interesting. Wallace Shawn's on the show, so it's all coming together. So later, Odo waits for Kira outside the Bajoran shrine. And he's a very good friend here in his subtle way. And Odo says, I understand you've stopped visiting Gamor. He lied to me, Odo. I thought he was different, but he's just like the rest of them. And Odo says, is he really? I've seen his file too, Major. He was 19 when the Chiesa was destroyed. He'd been in the military for less than a year, and he was one of 400 soldiers at the monastery. There's no way to know if he even fired a shot. Kira says he shouldn't have been there at all. This wasn't about Gamor's war record. If it really mattered, you wouldn't have waited for Dukat to hand it to you. You'd have looked it up yourself. Kira says, what are you trying to say? That I should go back down there? Oh, I wasn't saying that at all. Are you? Great friending.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because he's calling her out on her, on her hypocrisy here and on her behavior without necessarily telling her what to do. But he's, we all need friends who will call us on our BS sometimes. And I think Odo does a great job here and makes the point pretty clear that, that what Gamar did was not necessarily any worse than what Kira did, and pretty understandable, and especially somebody who has made the turn. It's like again, the black and white thinking, sort of moral absolutism that Kira gets herself stuck in. It's I don't know, it's interesting. I like it. So then Kira has another flashback. Her father is now full on dying.
Ed Harris?
Ed Harris, yes. That'd be way too expensive. She's at his deathbed, but Pharrell comes in and says, we've got a mission. And Kira forces her way into it to get revenge, right? Despite the fact that her father begs her not to leave him. She goes anyway. And we see sort of the, where she's at emotionally. She will find any excuse not to be there at her father's deathbed, but is not aware that that's what she's doing. I think she genuinely thinks she's going for revenge. I'm going to avenge you, not realizing that she's running from this.
Yeah, well said. It's exactly what's inferred, implied, what I took from it, and what is... I don't even think me at 17 watching this would have understood, as well as having then gone through a kind of a similar experience. How it's just great. What a ballsy the decision to tell this story, right?
Because it's so complex.
Yeah,
it's so layered, and but again, why is this such a good show? It's not the pew-pews, it's not the sci-fi, it's not the weird aliens, and it's not the fact that it's really good storytelling. It's the fact that the storytelling changes when we change.
Yeah.
Because as you said, we're 17, I'm not sure I understand the story.
Well, and also in all media, it's subverting expectation. In all media, not all, in many media properties, and the trope is, oh, I'm having a baby. We have to fight to get back to the hospital, so we're there for the birth. Oh, right. So and so's dying. I got to be there, and the last scene is okay, and we're holding hands, and as they go, they look at me in the eyes or whatever. That's the trope, right? Reality of life is that's really hard to be there for. It's difficult, and most people's fight or flight kicks directly, and I will speak from personal experience, right? Yeah. Oh yeah, we got to be there. Somebody needs to walk the dog. Somebody needs to get me the out of here, right? Yeah. So interesting, ballsy to tell the story, and it's prescient.
And the most complex layer of it is us as an audience deciding how aware of these decisions is she. Including her avoiding Gamar's deathbed. Is she even aware that she's doing that?
Well, and that she's already behaving in this scene. A lot of the times we see Kira, you feel like she's justified because you're like, oh, she's needs revenge, or she's avenging, or she's
and we trust her.
Yeah. But in here, she's behaving as if her father's already dead, right? She's avenging a death that hasn't happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's cool.
So she leaves her father's deathbed, despite the fact that he's begged her not to. Back in the present, Bashir then comes to Kira and says Gamar will be dead within the hour. And in Act 5, she coldly refuses to see him still. And Bashir, being the good friend and the good caregiver, says, Major, please, it's almost over. There's no more work to be done, no questions to ask. Just go to him, go to his quarters, and sit with him. And Kira says, I said no, don't ask me again. Oof. And he responds, fine. Do what you want, but you're making a mistake. Regardless of what Gamar's done in the past, he doesn't deserve to die alone. No one does. And, talk about the changes we have in our lives and our understanding of stuff. Not getting into any details, but within my family, I've been at the deathbed of people who have not been particularly great in their behaviors at times, and one could understand wanting to say, well, screw him. He deserves this. He made his bed, sort of. And I think for a lot of my life, I would have said, yeah. And at the situation where I was there, I didn't know about some of the things. And then I spent 10 years saying, man, I wish I hadn't been there, because screw that guy. And now today, it's it's more complicated than that. And it's you're trying to zoom out and look at the totality and look at our humanity regardless of our I don't know. It's so complicated. And I think if I've watched this episode, I don't know, many times, but if I watch this episode at 17, I watch this episode at 30, and then I watch this episode again at 45, I think my point of view on what Bashir just said here is going to be different every time. And I imagine when I'm 75, I'll have yet another layer to that.
I think often of, I'll keep it same thing. I'll keep it pretty generic. But once again, the trope is you usually film the old dying person who says, I'm not afraid to die, I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
I've heard from some folks that work in hospice and such that The overwhelming experience is that's not the case. People are very fearful to die. It is very scary. And to think that to go through that alone with nobody near you is very horrifying. And which is why the anecdote you brought up earlier, so much about COVID was terrible. So many people, lives lost and all of the stuff we went through. But to me, the scariest and saddest thing is that so many of those people died isolated from their families and unable to have anybody near them. That's just horrific.
It is. It's horror.
Yeah.
It's horror. It is. It
can't be buried or whatever however you want to,
Yeah.
But,
and in these situations with what Kira's sort of cover story is, like, he's so bad he doesn't deserve compassion back here, right? It makes me think about my idea of the death penalty, even. Where it's like, even like the worst of the worst, people who have done the absolute worst things, is there a world where you do not deserve compassion at the end? And like, I think about it this way, like, if what they did was so bad, chances are what they did in one way or another was not showing compassion for somebody else. And I'm not an eye for an eye kind of a person. And I think that, black and white terms, this idea that accountability and compassion are mutually exclusive, and they're not. And anyway.
Let's not go down too far into
that's a whole freaking.
But often, families, you have people who listen. I think to have these conversations, if you haven't had one of those horrific things happen to someone you love, feels really trite to really get deep to it, because there's so much wonderfulness when you see people who meet the accuser or the perpetrator and they say, "We forgive you. We're releasing you of our anger." But at the same time, and that's beautiful, right? But at the same time, I don't hold ill will towards the father whose child was horrifically slain and is like, I want to be there and watch it, right? Empathy brings you to both places.
Yeah. Well, and nobody was murdered, but I have been in that situation. Totally. To choose how to navigate.
I guess the change here, and I don't want to speak for you, but your whole life, especially in youth, the privilege of youth, we talk about black and white all the time. You start to think, or you want to believe that when you're put into one of those scenarios, you'll instantly know how to think and feel. But as we've talked often on the show, you're like, oh crap, even now I'm conflicted. I'm even more confused now.
Well, and I think the concept of, like, forgiveness is this beautiful, wonderful thing, but I don't think you have to forgive to have compassion.
Yeah.
I think compassion exists outside of forgiveness, outside of hate, outside of anger, outside of hurt, outside of all of those things. That to have compassion for someone is not the same thing as forgiving them. And it's not the same thing as making okay what happened. And who knows what the right thing to do is. But I'm someone who would have a very hard time believing that there's really any situation in which at least some basic compassion is not okay. That it does not negate accountability. Does not negate all of the anger and feelings. They are not mutually exclusive. They can happen at the same time. All right. I don't know what we're talking about now, but I do, but I don't want to talk about it. Anyway, yes. All right. So Bashir says that we flash back again, and the mission was a success. And Kira and Pharrell celebrate killing 15 Cardassians. And Kira is called to her father's bed. He, of course, died while she was on the mission. And he died calling her name. Oof. And it says here in the stage directions, Kira shakes her head. She refuses to let herself feel the pain of her loss. Instead, she focuses on revenge. And she says, get another raiding party together. I want to hit the Cardassians again as soon as we have a chance. But we then see Kira begin digging the grave for her father. and we see that she is emotionally shut down. But what wasn't clear until I'd watched a couple of times is that she's digging the grave in her father's garden.
Mm-hmm.
So that had been burned here. I don't think I clocked that.
Well, then when you see the two places at the end, I assume
at the end it's clear.
The thing here that I want to call it confusing, I thought it was an interesting wrinkle, and the psychology of it is it's complex, and that's the point, right? Yeah. But we know she was running away, right? We think she figures out at the end she was running away. But interestingly, in the moment, even in the flash forward, she says, "I missed his death by 14 seconds or whatever."
Yeah, an hour, but yeah.
And how, like, she's almost saying it like, so, you know, woe is me, I missed it by that shorter period of time. But also, you did it on purpose, right? You wanted to miss it. So it's doesn't matter, right? I think she's trying to get herself off the hook and also make herself feel guilty. It's all the things.
And it's the war between our conscious and subconscious, which are not always working in the same direction. Anyway. So, in the present, Kira does finally decide to go to Gamor, and she lies on him as he dies. Later, Bashir gives the post-mortem, and Nana gives a heartbreaking monologue about watching him fight for every breath. Oof. And Kira says, "I'm not even sure he knew I was there." Bashir says, "He knew. You gave him what he needed. He didn't die alone." And Kira says, "Maybe he gave me something I needed too. Like you said, I missed my father's death by less than an hour. Did you know that? Less than an hour. I always told myself that it was just bad luck, bad timing, the will of the prophets. But the truth is, I didn't have to leave when I did. I could have stayed a while longer, but I saw a chance to get away and I took it. I saw so much death during the occupation, felt so much pain. But he was my father, my strength, and I couldn't stand watching that strength slip away. So I ran." And Bashir says, "Just like you tried to run from Gamor. He reminded me so much of my father. Going through it all again, I couldn't face it. But in the end, you did. You were there for Gamor. I owed it to him. I owed it to my father to get it right this time." And predictably, but heartbreakingly, Nana's performance here was just phenomenal. And most of the scene is just a tight on her face, single take. Yeah. It's tough. I mean, I certainly, to be perfectly honest, I thought of you, Mike, when I saw this, and I was just like, God damn it, because you've been through this. I have not yet.
Yeah, and I was Kira, right? I had so much wanting to flee and not understanding, and I've talked about this on the watch along. So, and some of our watch along patrons shared some incredible stuff, and we'll choose to share that on the YouTube or not. You can also join at patreon.com/KNM and check out the replay. The chat's preserved. So I'll just briefly say, my experience. I had years of very similar guilt to Kira because when my father passed away, there was so much trials and tribulations leading up to it that when he made the decision to he wanted to die, it wasn't don't want to die alone, it was I want to die at home. And so he came home, they took him off all the machines, and when he passed away finally, I just felt relief. I just felt like free of that just kind of never-ending cycle of sad every day and scared every day. And then for years after that, I just felt guilty for being an asshole, and what kind of a piece of turd would feel relieved that their parent died instead of like trying to fight for one more day or convince him not to come off the machines, or and that was one of my journeys. We talk about our journeys in therapy and whatnot, but I get it. All of those feelings are viable, and nothing brings it back. And to this day, when crisis moments hit, I have to fight the urge to go into that place of just like, no, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here. I don't want to see it. I don't want to be here. I don't want to see it. Yeah. I'm sure that's not exclusive to me. I think a lot of people deal with that. But to this day, I have to slap myself to be present in those moments, and it's difficult.
Yeah. Well, and your subconscious is trying to protect you.
Yeah, fair.
And it's not wrong to do so. All right. So lastly, Dukat and Weyoun go to Sisko and tell him, we're going to tell the Cardassian people that Gamor had a last-minute change of heart and has embraced the Dominion. Of course. Why wouldn't they? Just diabolical. And they want his body to give it a place of prominence and turn him into a martyr. But of course, Sisko says it's already taken care of. And so I'll read the stage directions of our finale here. So we don't know where we are at first, but we are close on Kira as she pats down the earth on a fresh grave. She looks down at Gamora's last resting place, a look of sad acceptance on her face. And we see Taban's gravesite, her father. The once weathered tree is green again, as is the grass at its feet. But other than that, things haven't changed much, except that there are now 2 graves at the foot of the cliff, one old and one new. And as Kira looks down at the graves of Kira and Taban, we ... And so her 2 fathers together at her father's garden. Really great image to finish the show with. I mean, I really wish that it wasn't done on a soundstage.
Yeah, that last one.
And so obviously so. But you know, that's TV in the 90s. You don't have much of a choice. So
I felt like that last scene, that was the visuals of it you wish was a little, you know, totally get it. But the previous scene too was totally trite. I get why they did it, but Weyoun and Dukat would, of course they're going to do propaganda with that. They know that he's not going to give them the body. So I feel like they never would have had that interaction, right? That never would have happened. Like they wouldn't have asked and
I don't think so. I mean, you got to ask.
For what?
Just, you know, what's that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe, yeah.
Because I mean, propaganda. You're gonna make a shrine. You're gonna make a whole thing out of it, and like, they don't know that Kira's gonna want the body.
Yeah, but they gotta know they're not gonna give him the body. Well, I guess, yeah. Why wouldn't they?
I mean,
yeah.
Because if Kira doesn't want it, I mean, you know, obviously Sisko knows they're gonna use it for propaganda nonsense. But he's a Cardassian. You're giving him back to his people. Like,
yeah, okay, that's fair.
You know, body recovery in, you know, geopolitical stuff happens all the time.
Well, you know what we should give back to our people, Keith? Some of their time. And the only way to do that is to get to the last segment.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we can forego the nonsense and agree that monologue is the best thing.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, just hand Nana the ball. He's going to take it in for the touchdown, for sure. 100%. You get some stamp balls. Hell yeah, they are self-sealing. Here are some stamp balls for you.
Oh, Keith.
Yes, here we are.
Here we are back to where I began the episode with feeling 2 ways. The story we're telling, I think, is simple and not simple and beautiful. Some excellent performances. The flashback sequences were not the best, but they tell the story, right? And I filled in a lot of the blanks for myself because of experiences. I think that I have the facility to do so far, and many people do at an age. The problem I have, right? So I loved those things, and I think there aren't many bones to pick, to be honest. It might not be the most substantial story to tell, but I think for Kira, it's important. Here's my issue, and it's what we talked about when you look at things in context, in sequence. As I was watching, even as we're talking about it, it's hard for me not to feel a little bit like we keep eating the same sandwich. this is like the 4th or 5th daddy parent like story of the season. Another dad died, like Garrick's dad died, and then we've been doing this, right? And then Bashir's parents come, and then O'Brien's dad, he's got to deal with being a daddy, and it's like now it's starting to feel like a trend, right? Can we get back to the intergalactic war happening? I love these moments. You know I love these episodes, but we've been doing it. It's like kind of feeling a little samey. Now, it's Nana. I love her, but I just got to be honest. I can't shake the feeling that it's like a little bit. We just did this. We just did this, and it affects it. It affects it. Especially when I'm waiting every week, I'm like, oh my god! And because like 3 weeks ago when you're like, this is where it starts, baby. We got a 2-parter. It's all launching off, and now I'm like, okay, did it though? When does it? Brought me my feels, and it was so true to life. Her warring id and ego and self conscious and subconscious. It's all brilliant stuff if you're into that nuance and thirsting for it. I can see where it wouldn't be for everybody, especially seeing that we've done it a bunch. For me, this is probably like trending towards an A episode because of acting and and we had some good friendship, right? Some like sound friendship, and not just sage wisdom for the sake of sage wisdom, but two friends who are just like, hey, one friend who's like, get over your shit and go deal with the thing you gotta deal with, and the other one who's like, I'm not telling you what to do, but here's what the right thing to do is.
But also kind of get over your shit. It's like
medically speaking, yeah. So all that, it's probably an A episode that I have to. So if I'm starting at like 90, but I have to knock it because I'm feeling a little like, oh, I just had this for dinner last night. So I'm gonna go 83 self-sealing stem bolts.
Huh. Ironic.
That's the same number you put down, isn't it?
It's exactly the same number I put down. I think I sort of agree with all the things that you said, and so I won't belabor it and say the same thing. I will say, however, in defense of this episode's part of the larger story arc and the bigger world building, I think it actually subtly does give us a lot more of that world building with Weyoun and Dukat. We're learning, all right, so what's going on Cardassia now that the Dominion has taken over? What's happening? What is Dukat's role as the new head of the Cardassian government? Well, we learn he's a figurehead. He is indeed a Dominion puppet. His, advisor, Weyoun, is clearly in charge of this whole thing. But Dukat is sort of blustering around like he's somehow the leader, that their desperation to do the propaganda element of this speaks to a little bit of instability among their people, and that not everybody is on board with this. So, you have to try extra hard with they're obviously terrified of the information that he's giving on Dukat, so that matters. Obviously, it's not as stable as you think, because there's both the intelligence but also the propaganda element of this, and the sort of bemused cockiness of Weyoun here, that he's sort of watching it from the side, like watching ants fight. He's just sort of like curious, like, oh, it's kind of fun, but like he doesn't particularly care about any of these things. And I think that is interesting in the larger world that we're building here, and lay some brick for stuff that we have coming up, and answering some questions that we had after By Inferno's Light. So I think it actually is subtly more important than we think it is. But all that said, I think it's a little uneven. I think Nana's performance and the Kira's journey is really interesting, really great. Like I said, the flashbacks and the cave set and that, and some of the other performances I didn't land as well as I'd hope. It felt a little uneven, and so it's good. It's a perfectly fine episode. But you're right, we're in a little bit of a story lull here. They're all good episodes, and if this episode were in season 2, we'd be like, holy crap. But yeah, we are treading water a little bit before we kick back in. So yeah, it gets 83 self-sealing stem bolts from me as well. In the world out there, it gets a 7.1 out of 10, which makes it 124 out of 173. So not super well regarded in the canon of Deep Space Nine by the fans. And next week, guess what? It's gonna be Ferengi love songs. So, I mean,
Go back to the Corkwell.
Might be a Ferengi episode.
So maybe a rom-com?
Well, we're gonna find out. We're gonna be some love songs. So, there you go. We will see you back here next week with that. Thank you so much for watching. You can join our Patreon at patreon.com/KandM. Yeah, and if you're listening to the audio-only version of this on the podcast, leave us a rating and review. It really helps us find more folks to listen to this nonsense. We very much appreciate it. So yeah, we'll see you back here next week. We still have to schedule Wrath of Khan, Mikey. And do that with the patrons as well. Anyway, yeah, till then, this has been Keith and Mike. Watch Deep Space Nine. Thank you for watching K&M Entertainment. If you enjoyed our particular brand of nonsense, please like and subscribe. Or become one of our patrons at patreon.com/KNM.
Odo doesn't have to poop anymore. He's done pooping.
No more pooping.
Back to gooping.
All goop, no poop.
All right, we'll see you next week, folks. Barack keeps texting me.
Doing a podcast.